The sound of a silver fork clashing against bone china pierced the suffocating silence of the dining room. There was no cake, no candles, and definitely no birthday song. Under the cold crystal chandelier, Harper, my sister, slowly slid a black velvet box across the polished mahogany table. The friction of the box sounded eerie, like a snake slithering toward its prey. "Happy 30th, Victoria," Harper whispered, a smile curling on her lips, but her eyes were ice cold. "Open it. Maybe this will explain why, in this family, you've always been a mistake." My mother, Beatrice, didn't intervene. She just calmly raised her glass of expensive Chardonnay for a sip, her eyes deliberately avoiding mine, staring out into the pitch-black night beyond the window. Inside the box was a DNA test kit. They thought the truth about my bloodline would be the knife that finished me off, stripping me of my inheritance and throwing me out on the street. But they were dead wrong. They didn't see the fear in my eyes because they didn't know I had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. That night, a sudden downpour battered New York City, washing away the flashy neon lights but unable to wash away the chill gripping my mind. I drove back to my apartment on the Upper West Side, the black velvet box sitting silently on the passenger seat like a passenger of death. I didn't cry. Tears are a luxury for those who still hope to be loved. As for me, I'm a senior financial analyst. I face risks with data, not emotions. I took the test sample that very night, not to obey Harper, but because I needed to define my position on this chessboard. Harper never plays a hand she isn't sure she'll win. If she dared to bring this box to the dinner table, she already knew the results. The only question was, why now? Why wait until 3 months after Dad died? 5 weeks passed in stifling silence. I still went to work, still smiled politely at shareholder meetings, but all my senses were tuned tight like violin strings. I started reviewing my memories. My mother's shifty eyes whenever Dad mentioned my name, the way Dad always looked at me with a strange mix of heavy responsibility and unbridgeable distance, and then the email with the results arrived on a gray Tuesday afternoon. I sat in my glass office on the 40th floor, my hand on the mouse steady. A light click. The screen displayed the bold text, "No biological relationship found with the Carter family reference sample." Even though I was mentally prepared, that line still felt like a death sentence for the identity I'd held for 35 years. I was not Robert Carter's daughter. But the next part of the report was what made my blood run cold, then boil over. The DNA database found a close genetic match. Richard Hayes. The name sounded distant at first, but for someone in finance like me, he was a dormant legend. I dove into the archives. Richard Hayes, a commercial real estate tycoon of the 80s, a wealthy bachelor who died 5 years ago. And most importantly, a yellowed newspaper article from 36 years ago exposed it all. Mystery investor, Richard Hayes injects capital to save Carter Industries. Everything clicked into a complete ironic picture. My mother had an affair with the man who saved her husband's career. I was the result of that affair. But ironically, the blood of my real father flowing in me, Richard Hayes, was indirectly what kept the Carter empire alive today. Without Richard's money, the Carter family would have gone bankrupt long ago. Harper was living the high life on a foundation built by my biological father. Yet she dared to use this truth to humiliate me? I decided to throw a grenade into their fake peace. I took a screenshot of the DNA result and sent it straight to the family group chat with a single question. "Anyone want to explain this?" The reaction was instant. My phone buzzed violently. My mother, Beatrice, called, her voice breaking in tears, begging me to delete the message, talking about past mistakes and forgiveness. She said Dad had accepted it, had let it go. She talked about family, about honor. But absolutely Not a single word of apology for the daughter who had lived 35 years as an outsider in her own home. But Harper was different. She didn't call. She texted. A short, cruel, and smug message. Now you know. Do you think you still have any right to claim my father's assets? You mongrel. I called Harper back. The moment she picked up, I didn't let her spew any venom. How long have you known Harper? I asked, my voice icy. 20 years, Harper sneered, the sound distorted through the speaker. I've known since I was 16. I found Mom's diary. Why do you think I always got everything I wanted? Why Mom always spoiled me unconditionally? Because I had dirt on her. And now I'm going to use that dirt to kick you out on the street. 20 years. That confession rang in my head. Harper had been emotionally blackmailing Mom for 2 decades. Every favor, every gift, every bias I endured wasn't because Mom loved her more, but because she feared her. I hung up and saved the recording. Harper thought she had just dealt the fatal blow, but she made the rookie mistake of the arrogant. She revealed her motive too soon. I was no longer the submissive big sister. That night, I didn't sleep. I used an old access code, which they forgot to revoke, to log into the family's internal accounting system. With the skills of a risk analyst, I began a post-mortem on the Carter family cash flow over the last 12 months. The numbers started to speak. I discovered unusual cash withdrawals, $50,000, $20,000, $30,000, all made while Dad was bedridden in the final stages of cancer. The beneficiary was none other than Harper. This wasn't inheritance. This was elder financial abuse, a serious felony in this state. The next morning, I didn't go to the family lawyer, Mr. Harrison, whom I suspected might also be manipulated by Mom and Harper. I went to Sarah Chen, a shark in New York inheritance litigation, known by the nickname the Will Terminator. I slammed the thick file onto Sarah's desk. DNA results, the article about Richard Hayes, the recording of Harper, and most importantly, bank statements proving Harper had been draining Dad's assets before he died. Sarah flipped through the pages, her sharp eyes lighting up behind her glasses. She looked up at me, a smirk appearing. Ms. Carter, your sister thinks she's playing chess, but she doesn't know you just turned the board into a boxing ring. We're not just going to protect your share, we're going to make her regret ever starting this war. The reading of the will was set for next week. Harper was gloating, preparing a victory party. She didn't know that I wasn't going there to receive a verdict. I was going there to execute my own sentence. The 3 days before the reading of the will were the longest of my life, but also the quietest. I turned off my phone, refusing all calls from distant relatives, vultures who smelled money and started circling the rotting corpse of a broken family. Harper, on the other hand, was busy partying. Through social media, I saw her checking in at luxury car showrooms and expensive omakase dinners, accompanied by cryptic statuses about new beginnings and justice served. She was spending the money before she even had it in her hand. That is the arrogance of someone who has never tasted failure. On the fateful morning, the Manhattan sky was lead gray, signaling a storm rolling in from the Atlantic. I stood before the mirror, adjusting the collar of my custom-made black dress. Not the sad, mourning kind of black dress, but a sharp silk armor, form-fitting, exuding cold power. I applied deep red lipstick, the color of blood, the color of war. Today, I wasn't going to my father's funeral. I was going to the funeral of this fake bloodline. Sarah Chen met me in the lobby of the Harrison & Associates building. She wore an ivory white suit, standing out in the rushing crowd dressed in dark colors. It was Sarah's psychological tactic. Always be the center of attention, make the opponent squint to look at you. "Are you ready, Victoria?" Sarah asked, no worry in her voice, only the excitement of a hunter about to enter the woods. I've been ready for 35 years, I replied, tightening my grip on the handbag containing the bomb we were about to detonate. We took the private elevator to the top floor. Mr. Harrison's office was just as I remembered, filled with the smell of old mahogany, old paper, and the dignified silence of old money. But today, the air was thick, heavy as if gravity here was double that of the outside. When the conference room doors opened, I saw them sitting there. My mother, Beatrice, sat huddled at the corner of the table. She looked 10 years older in just a few weeks. Thick powder couldn't hide the deep wrinkles and hollow eyes from insomnia. She clutched a handkerchief, her eyes darting around like a small animal cornered. She knew something, or at least, she sensed the coming earthquake. When she saw me walk in, she started to open her mouth, perhaps for a fake greeting, but my icy stare stopped the words right in her throat. She lowered her head, avoiding me. Sitting opposite her, dominating the center spot, was Harper. In stark contrast to Mom, Harper was blindingly radiant. She wore a royal blue dress, too colorful for a will reading, and wore the diamond jewelry set I knew for a fact was Mom and Dad's wedding anniversary gift. She leaned back in her chair, legs crossed, scrolling through her phone with feigned boredom. Next to her was her private lawyer, a man with a greasy face and a permanent grin, the kind you'd see on car accident, call now, billboards at bus stops. Oh, look who decided to show up. Harper looked up, a smirk full of pity. You still came, Victoria? I thought after knowing the truth you'd have enough self-respect to stay away. After all, this is internal Carter family business. She emphasized Carter family like a slap in the face. Her lawyer laughed along, a grating, snickering sound. I pulled out a chair and sat opposite Harper, moving slowly, deliberately. I didn't look at her. I took out a bottle of water, unscrewed the cap, and took a small sip. My ignoring her made the smile on Harper's face stiffen. Nothing annoys a narcissist more than being treated as if they don't exist. Save your breath, Harper. Sarah Chen spoke for me, her voice soft but sharp as a razor. You'll need your voice to explain a lot of things later. Harper narrowed her eyes, about to retort, when the heavy oak door at the head of the table opened. Mr. Harrison walked in. Mr. Harrison had been my father's legal representative for 40 years. He was the embodiment of loyalty and discretion. Usually, he greeted me with the warm smile of an uncle, but today, his face was set like stone. He shook no hands, spoke no empty pleasantries about loss or condolences. He walked straight to the head chair, placing a thick file on the table. The thud of the file sounded dry and final, ending all whispers in the room. Harper sat up straight, her eyes glued to the file like a starving hyena. In her mind, that was the ticket to a lifetime of royalty. She believed the DNA result was the ultimate trump card, that the law would stand by blood relations. She didn't know that in my father's world, and now my world, blood isn't the thickest thing. Loyalty is what decides everything. Mr. Harrison took off his glasses, pulled out a silk cloth to wipe them slowly, then scanned all of us. His gaze lingered on me a moment longer, a look containing respect and deep sympathy. Then he turned to Harper, his eyes shifting to cold and stern. Before we begin, Mr. Harrison's voice rang out deep and echoing in the closed room. I want to remind everyone present, what I am about to announce is the final and absolute will of Mr. Robert Carter. He drafted these terms in a state of complete clarity, with full awareness of every secret and every betrayal happening under his roof. The word betrayal hung in the air. I saw my mother shudder slightly. Harper scoffed, clearly thinking he was referring to me, the bastard child. Start already, old man, Harper muttered, tapping her long, sharp nails on the table. We all know what the result will be. Mr. Harrison didn't react to the rudeness. He opened the file, the rustling paper sounding like distant thunder. He pulled out the main document, placed it neatly in front of him, and began to read. I, Robert James Carter, declare this to be my last will and testament. The whole room held its breath. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, feeling my heart beat slowly, powerfully. The moment of truth had arrived. Harper thought she was at the finish line, but she didn't know that the starting gun had only just been fired. And that shot would be aimed straight at her black heart. The large conference room plunged into absolute silence, save for the rustling of papers turned by Mr. Harrison. That sound, in this suffocating space, felt sharp as a razor blade gliding over skin. I watched Harper. She was trying to keep a calm face, but her fingers gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white, betraying the extreme tension inside. She looked like a gambler shoving all her assets into the final hand, convinced she held the ace. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, adjusted his reading glasses down his nose, and spoke in a steady, resonant voice. Article 3. Regarding inheritance and asset distribution. He paused a beat, his eyes sweeping over my mother, Beatrice, then stopping at Harper. That look carried the weight of a warning, but they were too blinded by greed to notice. I, Robert James Carter, affirm that all decisions below are made based on 30 years of observation regarding the competence, morality, and loyalty of my family members. I leave 70% of my total assets, including the estate in the Hamptons, the stock portfolio, and 51% of voting shares in Carter Industries to my eldest daughter, Victoria Carter. A shrill "what?" tore through the space. Harper sprang up from her chair as if electrocuted. The expensive leather chair toppled backward onto the floor with a loud crash, making my mother jump. "What the hell are you reading?" Harper screamed, her beautiful face contorted with rage. She pointed a finger straight at Mr. Harrison's face, then glared at me. "Are you senile? Or did this bitch bribe you? 70%? For her? Don't you know the truth?" Harper's lawyer hurriedly stood up, putting a hand on her shoulder to calm her, but his eyes were also wide with shock. He cleared his throat, trying to sound professional. "Mr. Harrison, perhaps there is a mistake here. My client, Ms. Harper, is the only legitimate heir by blood. We have undeniable medical proof that Ms. Victoria here is not—" "Sit down." Mr. Harrison's shout rang out with authority, drowning out the lawyer's whining. Mr. Harrison was no longer the gentle old attorney. In this moment he represented the will of my father, a man who never let anyone control him. "I haven't finished reading," Mr. Harrison said, his voice icy. "And if Ms. Harper interrupts one more time, I will ask security to escort her out. Then, you will hear the rest of the will via a court summons. Your choice." Harper panted, her chest heaving violently. She glared at me, but I only responded with a slight eyebrow raise. I took a sip of water, enjoying the panic starting to kindle in her eyes. Harper huffily set her chair upright and sat down, but her eyes still burned with hatred. Mr. Harrison waited for the air to settle before continuing. This time his voice was slower, emphasizing every single word, as if he wanted to hammer each one into the listeners' minds. "I foresaw there would be disputes regarding Victoria's lineage. Therefore, I want to clarify this matter once and for all in this legal document. I have known the truth about Victoria's biological origin since she was 2 years old." The room felt like all the air had been sucked out. I heard my mother choke back a sob, her hand covering her mouth tightly. She stared into space, her face drained of blood. For 35 years, she lived in fear of the secret being exposed, letting Harper blackmail her, treating me poorly to hide her guilt. But it turned out my father knew. He knew everything, right from the start. His silence wasn't ignorance, it was tolerance. And that silence was both a shield protecting the family and a sentence of conscience for her. Mr. Harrison continued reading, letting no one's emotions interrupt. I know Victoria is the biological daughter of Richard Hayes. However, being a father is not about providing a genetic code. Being a father is the sleepless nights when a child has a fever, teaching them to ride a bike, seeing yourself in their determination and effort. Victoria may not carry my blood, but she carries my soul, my will, and my dignity. Those are things genetics cannot create. I felt my nose sting. I bit my lip hard to stop the tears. All those years I thought I was despised, left on the sidelines of family gatherings. Dad was always watching me. He saw it all. He saw my desperate effort to prove myself. And he acknowledged it in the most eloquent way, even when he was no longer of this world. But the next part of the will was the real punishment for Harper. Conversely, to my second daughter, Harper Carter. Although you carry my blood entirely, I am sorry to say, I do not see any of the Carter family values in you. Your laziness, arrogance, and bottomless greed are the greatest disappointments of my life. I leave you the remaining 30% of the assets, but this amount will be bound by strict trust terms, dispersed in small drops monthly to ensure you do not throw it all out the window within a year. Harper sat frozen. Her face turned from red to white, then back to a harsh red. Her perfect plan, using the DNA result to strip me of everything, had just been crushed by the words of the dead. My father had neutralized her weapon by acknowledging it. DNA doesn't matter. That was his message. Impossible, Harper mumbled, her voice trembling. This is a forgery. The old man was senile. Or it was you. She spun around to face me, eyes wild. You forced him to write this, didn't you? In his final months, you poisoned his mind with this garbage. She turned to her lawyer, screaming, Do something! Sue! We will sue! This is coercion! He wasn't in his right mind when he wrote these lines. Harper's lawyer wiped sweat from his forehead, fumbling to open his briefcase. Mr. Harrison, my client wishes to formally file a complaint challenging the validity of this will based on the grounds. Based on what grounds? I spoke up. This was the first time I had opened my mouth during the entire meeting. My voice was calm, cold, cutting through the chaos. I stood up, adjusted my blazer, and looked straight into Harper's eyes. You intend to sue on the grounds that Dad was manipulated, Harper? Do you really want to go down that road? I looked at Sarah Chen. Sarah smiled, a sharp smile. She pushed another file, thinner but 1,000 times more dangerous, toward the center of the table. Before you decide to file a lawsuit, Sarah said, her voice gentle as if advising a child, I suggest you take a look at this. This is what Mr. Carter prepared specifically for this situation. He called it moral hazard insurance. The trap had sprung, and Harper had just stepped into it with both feet. The gray folder lay isolated in the middle of the mahogany table, looking as harmless as a boring administrative document. But given the air thick with the smell of gunpowder in the room, it felt more like the trigger for a nuclear bomb. Mr. Harrison didn't rush to open it. He placed both hands on the file, his eyes drilling deep into Harper, who was still breathing sharp gasps of rage and fear. Ms. Harper, Mr. Harrison said, his voice dropping a tone, carrying a hidden threat. Before you and your lawyer here put pen to paper on any lawsuit, Mr. Carter instructed me to show you this. He called it the last chance. And believe me, he wasn't a man who gave out chances often. Harper sneered, trying to salvage some crumbled pride. Chance? He's dead. What can he do to me? Are you going to scare me with some teary moral letter? Mr. Harrison didn't answer. He slowly opened the file. Inside were not letters. Inside were photographs. Dozens of black and white photos taken from a distance but sharp in detail, accompanied by bank statements and phone data extracts. He slid the first photo toward Harper. August 14th last year. Mr. Harrison read the date aloud like a judge passing a sentence. This photo shows you having lunch with Ronald Perkins, a lawyer specializing in will disputes, known as a vulture in this area. At that time, your father had just received his terminal cancer diagnosis 2 days prior. While Victoria was at the hospital listening to the doctor's treatment plan, you were busy figuring out how to tear apart his assets before he was even in the ground. Harper's face changed color. She snatched the photo, her hands shaking violently. "That's not all." Sarah Chen spoke up, pulling another sheet from the file, her voice cutting like a scalpel. "This is security camera footage extracted from Chase Bank. On September 20th, you used the power of attorney, which Mr. Carter signed for you strictly to pay hospital bills, to withdraw $50,000 in cash from his personal savings account. You told your mother it was to buy imported special medication, but medical records show Mr. Carter never used that medication." Sarah paused a beat, smiling coldly. "Where did that money go, Harper? Did it flow straight to the Porsche dealership in New Jersey to put a deposit on your new SUV?" The room went silent. My mother, Beatrice, gaped in shock. She turned to look at her golden child, eyes full of bewilderment and broken trust. "Harper, you told me. You said it was for medicine." "Shut up, Mom!" Harper screamed, cold sweat starting to bead on her forehead. "They're making it up. This is a trap." "A trap?" Mr. Harrison interrupted, voice steely. "Yes, this is a trap. But the person who said it was you, Harper. Your father simply recorded the process of you digging your own grave." He pulled out the final piece of evidence, an online purchase receipt printed on A4 paper. November 3rd, 3 weeks before Victoria's birthday, you ordered a DNA test kit online and requested express delivery to your office. You planned that cruel scene at the birthday dinner for a whole month. Your father knew. He saw this receipt on the shared family email you forgot to log out of. He was in pain, not because of the disease, but because he realized his own biological daughter had such a dark heart. Harper slumped into her chair, her strength drained. Her lawyer hurriedly gathered his papers, muttering something about needing to review the file and inching away from his client. He understood perfectly well that this lawsuit was dead on arrival, but Mr. Harrison wasn't done. He flipped to the last page of the file, holding the most brutal economic punishment. "Back to the litigation issue," he said, returning to professional coldness. "Mr. Carter's will includes a no-contest clause under New York state law. If any beneficiary challenges the validity of this will without probable cause of coercion or fraud, they forfeit their entire inheritance." He pointed to the mess of evidence on the table. "With this pile of proof regarding your conspiracy to misappropriate assets and your emotional abuse of the deceased, I guarantee you, the court will not only dismiss your lawsuit, but they will also consider prosecuting you for fraud. And one small thing," Sarah Chen added, her smile now making me feel satisfied to the bone. "In the financial records, Mr. Carter noted all the funds he gave you over the last 10 years. Money for a house, money to pay your husband's gambling debts, failed investments, totaling $250,000. In the books, he clearly marked this as an advance on inheritance." Sarah tilted her head, looking at Harper like a pitiful creature. "If you accept this will, that debt is forgiven, and you get 30% of the remainder. But if you sue and lose, which is certain, you lose your inheritance rights. At that point, this advance automatically converts into a personal debt to the estate. Meaning, not only do you get 0 cents, but you also owe Victoria, the primary heir, $250,000, and we will foreclose on your house immediately." Harper opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her face shifted from white to ashen gray. She looked around, seeking salvation, but found only Mom's disappointed gaze and my absolute coldness. She had lost. Not because of bad luck, but because she underestimated the father she thought she could outsmart, and underestimated the sister she always looked down on. I stood up, the sound of the chair sliding on the wood floor echoing decisively. I looked down at Harper, who now looked so small and pathetic in her expensive designer dress. "You have 24 hours to move out of Mom and Dad's apartment," I said, voice calm as if discussing the weather. "And Harper, don't forget to return the Porsche keys. It's in the company's name, and now the company is mine." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind my mother's sobbing and the deathly silence of the sister who had just lost everything. But I knew this wasn't the end. The biggest secret, the secret about the man named Richard Hayes, was still inside the second envelope that Mr. Harrison hadn't opened yet. The air in the conference room thickened, heavy enough to taste the metallic tang of tension in every breath. Harper sat limp like a puppet with cut strings, staring blankly into the void. My mother, Beatrice, was dabbing at late tears with a handkerchief. Tears I believed were for her own shame rather than for Dad's spirit. But Mr. Harrison didn't allow the curtain to fall on this play yet. He reached for the final envelope at the bottom of his briefcase. Unlike the pristine white files before, this envelope was yellowed with time, edges frayed, sealed with red wax, the classic style of New York lawyers in the 80s. "This is the final matter," Mr. Harrison said, his voice deepening, carrying a tone of reverence. "And it relates directly to why Ms. Harper lost the moment she began her scheme." He carefully used a letter opener to break the seal, pulling out a document typed in old dot matrix ink and a handwritten letter. "35 years ago," he began, glancing at my mother, "when the Carter Corporation was on the brink of bankruptcy and Mr. Robert discovered he was infertile, an agreement was made. Not a sordid affair as Mrs. Beatrice mistakenly believed, and certainly not a mistake as Ms. Harper insulted her sister." My mother jerked her head up, eyes wide with shock. "What did you say? Robert knew right from that moment?" "He didn't just know, ma'am. He was the one who proposed it," Mr. Harrison retorted coldly. "Richard Hayes was Robert's best friend. When Robert knew he needed an heir to salvage his spirit, and Richard had the financial ability to save the company, the three of them made a deal. Richard would provide the capital and the genetics. In return, Robert would raise the child as his own, and Richard would retreat into the shadows." He pushed the old contract toward the center of the table. The signatures of 3 people, Dad, Mom, and Richard Hayes, were clearly visible under the dateline from 1989. "But," Mr. Harrison raised his voice, "Richard Hayes was an old fox of Wall Street. He never invested without insurance. In this agreement, there is an appendix clause named Protective Provision." My heart pounded. I never knew about this. The clause states, if the identity of the child, Victoria, is denied by the Carter family, or if Victoria is treated unfairly based on lineage issues, a secret blind trust established by Richard will be immediately activated. Mr. Harrison looked straight at Harper, his gaze piercing through her dark soul. "Ms. Harper, by publicizing the DNA results and deliberately using them to strip Victoria of her inheritance, you accidentally activated this clause. You thought you were exposing a bastard? No, you just handed the key to the treasure to its rightful owner." He pulled a fresh financial report from the file. "The trust Richard Hayes left for his biological daughter includes a Class A office building in Midtown Manhattan, a government bond portfolio worth $20 million, and all intellectual property rights to technology inventions he held before passing. The total estimated current value is over $80 million. The room fell into a deathly silence. The number $80 million rang out like a sledgehammer hitting Harper's head. She had fought tooth and nail, committed crimes, and traded her honor to grab 30% of my father's assets, which was only worth about $5 million after debts. And in the process, she had helped me receive a fortune 16 times larger. Harper's jaw dropped, her face twisting in an expression mixed between horror and extreme jealousy. 80 million? She hissed, voice cracking. She's the child of a billionaire? And me? I'm the real daughter, and what do I get? A pile of debt? That is the fairness of fate, Harper. I spoke up, voice calm but filled with disdain. Richard Hayes watched me from afar for 35 years. He saw me struggle, saw me endure Mom's coldness and your bullying. He couldn't intervene because of his promise to Dad. But he prepared for this day, the day your greed would hand me exactly what I deserve. I picked up Richard's handwritten letter. The handwriting was strong, bold. Inside were just a few short lines. To Victoria. I apologize for not being able to be your father in the light, but remember, you were never alone. Robert gave you a name, and I give you a future. Live the life you want, not the life they force upon you. My mother started sobbing loudly, a pathetic sound. Was she crying out of regret? Not quite. She was crying because she realized she had bet on the wrong horse for 35 years. She had spoiled Harper, the useless biological daughter, and cold-shouldered Victoria, the daughter carrying golden blood and protected by the two most powerful men in her life. Victoria, my mother stammered, reaching out to me. Mom didn't know about the trust. I'm sorry. We're still family, right? I looked at her trembling hand, the hand that never held mine when I needed it most. I stood up, gathered all the files on the table, tucking them firmly under my arm. Family? I laughed dryly, my cold eyes sweeping over both of them. Mrs. Beatrice, your family ended when you colluded with Harper to embezzle Dad's medication money. As for now, if you want to talk about family, contact my secretary. I have a lot of work to do managing two merged financial empires. I turned and walked away, my high heels clicking on the wooden floor like nails being driven into a coffin. Behind me, I heard Harper screaming in despair and Mr. Harrison coldly asking security to show them out of the building. The elevator doors closed, cutting off the chaotic sounds completely. I stood alone in the mirrored elevator cab, looking at my reflection. No longer the 35-year-old woman forgotten on her birthday. Now I was Victoria Carter Hayes, heir to two legacies, and the woman who just executed the sweetest revenge through ultimate success. But the game wasn't over here. Money is just a tool. Now is the time for me to use that tool to teach them the final lesson about karma. The silence after the will reading lasted exactly 48 hours. That was the time Harper needed to find a third-rate lawyer, the kind willing to sell their soul to the devil for a 40% contingency fee. She officially filed a petition with the Manhattan Surrogates Court, accusing me of using undue influence on Dad in his final days to alter the will. A stupid move, but desperation often blinds people. 3 days after filing, Harper appeared at my apartment door at midnight. She was drunk, pounding on the door, screaming curses that echoed through the luxury apartment hallway. She called me a thief, a bastard, threatened to spread rumors to ruin my Wall Street career. She didn't know that this building was equipped with state-of-the-art security, and the hallway cameras recorded every word, every crazy gesture of hers in sharp 4K resolution. The mandatory settlement hearing took place 6 weeks later. Harper walked into the courtroom with borrowed confidence. She had swapped the old vulture lawyer for an aggressive-looking man named Mr. Blocker. Their tactic was clear. Attack my origins to cast doubt on the legality of the inheritance. Your Honor, Mr. Blocker opened, voice booming, marching aggressively before the judge. My client, Ms. Harper Carter, is the only legitimate biological child. The fact that Mr. Robert Carter left the majority of assets to a person not of blood relation, while on high-dose painkillers, is a clear sign of cognitive decline. We believe Ms. Victoria exploited her father's vulnerable state to manipulate him. He presented a series of fallacious arguments, trying to paint me as a scheming gold digger, and Harper as the devoted daughter pushed aside. For a moment, I saw the judge frown when hearing details about the drugs Dad took. Harper glanced at me, a triumphant smile flashing on her lips. She thought she found a loophole. She thought the wind was changing. That was the fake climax I had been waiting for. It was Sarah Chen's turn. She didn't march around. She stood still, adjusted the microphone, composed as a lake before a storm. "Your Honor," Sarah said, voice soft but resonant. "The plaintiff argues about filial piety and mental clarity. We would like to present two pieces of physical evidence to clarify both issues." The large screen in the courtroom lit up. First was the video from my apartment security camera, the image of a drunk Harper, face twisted with rage, pointing at the camera and screaming, "I don't care what that old man wrote. I'll burn all that money before letting you have it. I should have pulled the plug on him sooner." The whole courtroom gasped. The judge widened his eyes, staring at the screen. The phrase, "pulled the plug sooner," rang out like a chilling confession of inhumane cruelty. Harper's face drained of blood. She tried to stand up to object, but was yanked down by Mr. Blocker. "And second," Sarah continued, giving the opponent no chance to breathe, "this is the private doctor's treatment log. On the day Mr. Carter signed the will, he refused painkillers for the entire 24 hours prior to ensure his mind was completely clear. He endured bone-crushing pain just to guarantee this document could not be twisted by greedy people." Sarah placed the medical log on the judge's bench, then turned to look at Harper. "Ms. Harper's lawsuit today is not based on legal grounds or reality. It is based on bitterness and greed. And under New York state law, as well as the clause in the will, this action has consequences." The judge banged the gavel. The dry sound rang out like a coffin lid slamming shut. "The court dismisses all requests from the plaintiff," the judge declared coldly, looking at Harper with disgust. "Furthermore, the court accepts the activation of the no contest clause in Mr. Robert Carter's will. The plaintiff, Harper Carter, acted in bad faith and without probable cause." The verdict was immediate. Harper lost her entire rights to the 30% assets, but her financial nightmare was only just beginning. Sarah Chen approached the opposing table, placing down a civil enforcement document. "Ms. Harper," Sarah said, loud enough for the court clerk to record. "According to the will terms, since you have lost inheritance rights, the $250,000 your father advanced you over the last 10 years has now officially converted into an overdue estate debt." I stepped forward, standing next to Sarah. This was the moment I delivered the final blow myself. "And since I am the sole executor of the estate now," I said, looking straight into Harper's eyes, wide with terror, "I demand the immediate recall of this debt. Plus the legal fees for today's trial that you must cover for me, the total debt is $285,000. I don't have that money," Harper stammered, sweat pouring down, smearing her thick makeup. "My cash account is empty. The house is mortgaged." "Then I am very sorry," I replied, sounding not sorry at all. "My lawyer will initiate foreclosure proceedings tomorrow morning. You have 30 days to move out of your house. This time, it's not moving out of Mom and Dad's, it's moving onto the street." Harper collapsed into her chair, face in hands. Her lawyer quietly packed his briefcase and slipped out the back door, abandoning his client in a puddle of despair. I looked at her one last time. No more gloating, just pity for someone who had everything but chose to throw it away. "You should have taken the 30% and lived a decent life, Harper," I whispered. "But greed is a hungry monster. The more you feed it, the more it eats you alive." I turned and walked out of the court, the noon sun shining brilliantly. I took a deep breath. The air of freedom, of justice, and of a new beginning had never tasted so sweet. After the legal storm at the courthouse, silence returned, But it was no longer the lonely emptiness of before. It was the silence of power. I sat in the living room of the penthouse in Hayes Tower, part of the massive fortune I had just taken over. Outside, the floor-to-ceiling glass, Manhattan lights sparkled like shattered diamonds, but I didn't look at them. I looked at the woman sitting curled up on the sofa opposite me, my mother, Beatrice. Gone was the high-class nobility of the Carter matriarch. No more expensive jewelry or glass of wine in hand. She sat there, hands clasped tight, trembling, looking small and pitifully old. She didn't come here to beg for love. She knew I had none left to give. She came because she had nowhere else to go. Harper had been evicted, assets frozen, and she, who had colluded in silence for 35 years, was now facing the risk of losing everything. "Tell me," I said, voice deep and cold, carrying no accusation, simply demanding a factual report. "About 1989, about the agreement between the three of you." My mother took a deep breath, tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. She began to tell the story, her voice breaking. That year, the Carter Empire was collapsing. Debts piled up, banks turned their backs. My father, Robert Carter, was desperate. At the same time, the doctor announced he was infertile. Two shocks hitting at once nearly drove him mad. He needed money to save the company, and he needed a child to save the ego of a patriarch. And Richard Hayes appeared. Richard. He loved me, Beatrice confessed, head bowed toward the floor. He loved me even before I met your father. But Richard was a man of honor. He stepped back so your father and I could be together. When he saw our family in danger, he made a crazy offer. It wasn't a secret affair in a cheap hotel. It was a summit that took place right in Dad's office. 3 people, 3 different pains and ambitions. Richard offered to inject capital to save the company and help Beatrice have a child. In return, he would disappear from the child's life, letting Robert have full paternity rights. Why? I asked, feeling disgusted at how they decided my fate like a commodity. Why did you agree? And why did you hate me so much? She looked up at me, eyes holding a lifetime of torment. Because every time I looked at you, I saw your father's weakness and Richard's unfinished love. You were living proof that this Carter family was built on another man's charity. I was afraid. I was afraid one day Richard would come back to claim you. I was afraid your father would look at you and remember his impotence. So I poured all my affection into Harper, the child who belonged to us completely. I laughed, a bitter sound. You were wrong, Mom, I said, standing up and walking to the window. Dad didn't see me as a humiliation. In the will, Dad said I carried his soul. Dad overcame his ego to love me. Richard overcame selfishness to protect me from afar. Only you, and Harper, were the only ones who couldn't overcome petty jealousy. The truth was clear. I wasn't a mistake. I was a solution. I was the key that saved this entire clan, but they treated me like a rusty lock to be discarded. My mother burst into tears, the cry of a complete loser. Victoria, I'm sorry. I know it's too late. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't know how to live now. Harper, she's going crazy. She demands money from me every day. I turned back, looking at her with the eyes of a judge before sentencing. I felt no hatred, but no respect either. I only saw responsibility. The responsibility of the victor toward the remnants of the war. I won't let you starve on the street, Beatrice, I said, deliberately not calling her Mom. But your royal life ends here. I tossed a file onto the table. It was the terms I had just drafted with the lawyer. I bought a 2-bedroom apartment in suburban New Jersey, under a charity foundation's name. You can live there for the rest of your life. I will provide you a stipend of $3,000 a month. Enough for food and basic utilities, but not enough for parties or designer clothes. My mother looked at the file, hands trembling as she picked it up. For someone who used to spend $3,000 on afternoon tea, this was an insult. But she knew. This was the only life raft. But there is one prerequisite, I emphasized, voice hardening. If I find out you transfer even a penny of this money to Harper, or if you let Harper move in, this agreement is canceled immediately. You will be evicted, and the allowance cut off forever. You want to separate mother and daughter? She gasped. No, I'm teaching you a lesson about boundaries, something you never taught me, I retorted coldly. Harper is a black hole. If you want to jump in there with her, I won't stop you. But don't use my money to do it. Beatrice stared at me, then slowly nodded. She took the pen, signing the document with shaky strokes. That was the moment she officially signed off on her failure as a mother. Go, I said, turning my back. The driver will take you to the new apartment. Don't take anything. The things in the old house now belong to me, and I will auction them all for charity. The door closed behind me. The space returned to silence. I poured myself a glass of wine, the kind Richard Hayes had aged in his private cellar since the year I was born, reserved for this very day. I took a sip. The wine was dry, bold, and deep. I didn't choose revenge with blood. I took revenge by stripping away what they craved most, the lavish lifestyle, and forcing them to live the mediocre life they once despised. Harper would have to earn a living. My mother would have to learn to budget. That was the cruelest punishment for those who spent their whole lives riding on someone else's coattails. I raised the glass toward the pitch-black night sky, where perhaps my two fathers were watching. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Richard. Your daughter has grown up. After settling the remains of the Carter family, I went back to my old apartment one last time before moving out. I didn't take much, just some clothes and an ebony wood box Mr. Harrison had handed to me personally after the will reading. He said, "This is the only thing Richard Hayes wanted to give you himself, but he couldn't wait." I placed the box on the vanity. Cold moonlight spilled through the window, illuminating the glossy varnish of the ebony. It was heavy, a weight not from size but from the secrets it held. For 35 years, I always asked myself who I was. Why did I always feel lost in my own home? Why did I have interests, habits, and a mindset completely different from Mom, Dad, and Harper? I took a deep breath, trembling as I unlocked the brass latch. Inside, resting on wine-red velvet, was a men's wristwatch. It wasn't a flashy Rolex covered in diamonds that Harper or the young Wall Street guys usually craved. It was a Patek Philippe Calatrava from 1989, the year I was born. 18K rose gold case, a dial simple to the point of austerity, alligator strap frayed, at the edges and darkened by sweat. It was the embodiment of quiet luxury, something people only recognize the value of when they truly understand it. Picking up the watch, I felt a strange warmth, as if it still held the body heat of its previous owner. The sapphire glass had a few tiny scratches, traces of being worn constantly, every day, every hour. Beneath the watch was a handwritten letter, thick cream-colored stationery, smelling faintly of pipe tobacco and fountain pen ink. I opened the letter. The handwriting was slanted, strong, and decisive. To Victoria, my daughter. If you are reading these lines, it means my silent promise to Robert has finally ended. I apologize for not being able to stand before you, hug you, and tell you how proud I am of you. Do you know this watch? I bought it the day you were born, and I wore it every day for 30 years, until I took my last breath. Robert had the privilege of hearing you cry, seeing you walk, hearing you call Dad. As for me, I only had time. I used this watch to count every hour I had to restrain myself from running to you. I counted every minute when I secretly stood in the back row at your high school graduation, watching you look for Robert in the crowd, but he didn't come because he was busy taking Harper on a trip. I wanted to rush the stage, scream, "Dad is here!" But I couldn't. I promised. I had to let you have a complete family, even if that family didn't deserve you. Every scratch on this watch face is a time I watched you fall, but stand up on your own. I saw you working at the coffee shop to pay your own tuition while Harper drove luxury cars. I saw you stay up all night at the office to prove your worth. You didn't inherit Robert's blood, Victoria. You inherited my resilience. The loneliness you felt all those years wasn't abandonment. That is the price of greatness. The alpha wolf always walks alone. This watch has counted down my waiting time. Now, I hand it over to you. Let it start counting your hours of happiness and freedom, things you have won for yourself. Love you, from the shadows and forever. Dad. Richard. My tears fell onto the paper, blurring his signature. I didn't sob like an aggrieved child. I cried in liberation. The hot tears rolled down my cheeks, washing away the thick makeup and the cold shell I had worn for years. Turns out I was never the outcast. I was never a mistake. I was the crystallization of a great and painful sacrifice. Robert's coldness was because he saw his rival in my eyes. Mom's cruelty was because she saw her guilt on my face. But above all, there was a man who loved me enough to accept being a ghost, just so I could have a safe social identity. I strapped the watch onto my slender wrist. The strap was a bit loose, but the case pressed against the pulse point on my wrist, transmitting a steady rhythm. Tick, tock, tick, tock. That sound rang in the quiet room like a second heartbeat. It was no longer the countdown of waiting. It was the beat of life, of power, and of legacy. I stood up, walking to the mirror. In the reflection was no longer Victoria Carter, the snubbed daughter trying to claw for recognition. The person in the mirror was Victoria Hayes, heir to an empire, a woman carrying the heart of an old wolf on her wrist and the mind of a warrior in her head. I raised my hand, pressing the watch face to my left chest. "I hear you, Dad," I whispered to the empty air. "I will never bow my head again. I will live the life you dreamed for me." That night, I slept the best sleep of my life. No nightmares, no anxiety. Only the gentle ticking of the Patek Philippe lulling me to sleep, like the lullaby of the father I never met, but who understood me better than anyone in the world. Tomorrow, the sun will rise. And that will be the first day in the era of Victoria. The old Carter mansion in the Hamptons was sold on an early autumn day when the maple leaves began to turn fiery red. I didn't attend the handover. I authorized a real estate firm to handle everything. They asked if I wanted to keep any mementos, oil paintings, porcelain collections, or family photos hanging along the stairs. "Sell it all and donate to orphanages," I replied over the phone. "There are no mementos there. Only props from a 35-year-long play." The money from the house sale, plus the massive assets from both fathers, gave me ultimate power, absolute freedom, but I didn't use it to buy yachts or private islands like Harper once dreamed. I bought a large farm in the Hudson Valley, a place with quiet hills and fresh air, far from the noise and fakery of Manhattan. As for Harper, news about her occasionally reached my ears through old acquaintances, though I never actively sought it. After having her house and car seized to pay the estate debt, Harper was forced to taste brutal reality. She is currently working as a receptionist for a small dental office in Queens. I heard she had to sell the last of her Hermes bags to pay rent for a cramped studio apartment. Once, an old friend told me they saw Harper staring blankly through the window of a high-end fashion store, eyes empty and longing. I didn't feel gloating. Gloating is an emotion for enemies. For me, Harper is now just a stranger I once knew, a victim of her own greed and the toxic spoiling she enjoyed. She is learning the beginner lesson I memorized at age 10. No one owes you a good life, you have to earn it yourself. And my mother, Beatrice, lives quietly in the New Jersey apartment I provided. Calls between us happen regularly on the first of every month, brief and polite, like between a landlord and tenant. She asks about my health. I ask about the weather where she lives. No one mentions the past. No one mentions Richard or Harper. The distance between us is no longer anger, but acceptance. She chose her path 35 years ago, and now she walks the rest of the way with loneliness as her baggage. That is fairness. On a sunny afternoon, I sat in the library of my new home, wearing Richard's Patek Philippe. Its gentle ticking had become the rhythm guiding my life. I realized that the greatest revenge isn't backing your opponent into a corner. The greatest revenge is turning their pain into your power. I founded the Hayes Carter Foundation, not a charity to launder money for the elite. My foundation operates with 3 specific goals: providing scholarships for children estranged from their families, but with the will to rise; offering free legal aid to victims of financial abuse and inheritance disputes; and funding research on family trauma. Every time I sign a scholarship check for a young girl trying to escape a toxic family's control, I see the image of myself years ago. I can't go back in time to hug the lonely Victoria at that birthday party, but I can help other Victorias not have to endure that loneliness. Richard couldn't step out to protect me, but his legacy is protecting thousands of others. That is how I write the happy ending to Dad's unfinished love story. Tonight, I stand on the porch, looking at the twinkling stars in the night sky. I am 36. I don't have a perfect traditional family, but I have peace. I have 2 fathers. One gave me a name to exist, and one gave me the means to live. Both, in their own flawed ways, loved me. And most importantly, I learned to love myself. I no longer wait for someone to validate my worth. My value lies in what I do, the people I help, and the freedom I breathe every day. My story ends here, but your story might be happening right now. Victoria Carter taught us a priceless lesson that no school teaches. Your value is not defined by how your family treats you. The people who are supposed to love you the most are sometimes the ones who hurt you the deepest. And their failure to love you speaks to their flaws, not yours. If you feel like the extra in your own home, if you have to work twice as hard to get half the recognition compared to your siblings, remember this: that coldness is the furnace forging your resilience. Don't take revenge with hatred. Take revenge by becoming so brilliant they can't touch you anymore. Build your own fortress. Find the silent Richard fathers in your life. Mentors, friends who truly cherish you. And when the time comes, have the courage to step out of the shadows, cut the toxic ties, and live the life you deserve. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. Healing is when you can tell your story without shedding tears anymore. Like me, Victoria, telling you right now. If this story touched your heart, if you saw a part of yourself in Victoria's lonely battle, hit that subscribe button right now. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next stories about justice and rebirth. And I want to hear your voice. Leave a comment below. Have you ever had to stand up and set boundaries with your own relatives? Or have you discovered a secret that completely changed your view of family? Your story matters, and this is a safe space for you to share it. Thank you for listening. Remember, sometimes rejection is fate's greatest protection. See you in the next video.